Back in 2014, a Serbian indie studio called Ebb Software announced an ambitious project that shocked players all around the world when the first teasers and trailers were published online. The game's visual style was brutal, with lots of gore, unsettling locations, and gross creature design. Clips of this game were all over the place. The imagery was repulsive, but at the same time very intriguing. Everybody wanted to get their hands on this strange and nightmarish game. Unfortunately, after nearly 7 years of development hell, Ebb Software released Scorn in 2022, and nobody talked about Scorn ever again. I had completely forgotten about this game. I don't know anybody who bought it or played it. I didn't see any reviews, and I haven't seen this game mentioned anywhere for any reason. I never got to know if it was good or not. But recently I saw Scorn going for some pocket change in a Steam sale, and I had to pick it up just out of curiosity. What happened to this game, and why does nobody talk about it? Did Scorn disappear because it took too long to release? Or did it simply fail to live up to the hype that was built up over almost a decade of crowdfunding and delays? Let's find out. The game opens up with a confusing cutscene where it's unclear if you're seeing the perspective of two different people or the same person at different points in time. Either way, you end up taking control of this character who falls through the ground and finds himself inside this abandoned facility where you seem to be the only living thing for miles. The first challenge you face are locked doors. In order to open doors and operate other types of contraptions, you need to stick your arms and fingers into these strange biomechanical consoles that look and sound very gross. The entire world of Scorn is like this. Every structure, machine, and even the terrain outside these facilities looks like it's made from a combination of organic material, metal, and concrete. Even the most mechanical things look like they are made from human body parts. And maybe they are. The first major puzzle you come across requires you to open a door that needs two people operating two different consoles at the same time. Although there's not a single living soul in sight, the floor above you seems to have these eggs growing on the walls. By controlling a claw machine, your first objective is to reorganize the eggs, allowing a marked egg to be moved to an extraction area where another claw transfers the egg back to the ground floor. With the power of editing, I can make it sound like this task was no trouble at all, but I actually had to stop recording at one point. Otherwise, I was going to end up with like 20 gigabytes of banging my head against the wall while trying to do the egg puzzle. But anyway. Back on the lower floors, the egg has hatched, and now you have this malformed creature riding on this on-rails dentist chair. You can change the layout of the railroad and lead the egg person to a couple of different places, but there's one unavoidable stop that the chair has to make, and it looks pretty painful. But the end of the line for this little fellow is much worse than getting stapled in the forehead with a chunk of metal. You have to operate a couple other consoles in order to transfer the egg guy from the rails onto the seat, and then... With the egg person smeared all over the floor, you take the opportunity to grab one of his arms, and now you can open the big door by sticking the lifeless arm in one of the consoles. This is Scorn in a nutshell. The game has these insanely detailed levels that are beautiful and horrible at the same time, and there's this shocking disregard for living creatures, while the entire building looks like it could be a living creature, and yet everything around you looks like it's either already dead or dying. The world of Scorn is amazing. It's abstract and scary and expertly handcrafted to be provocative and gross, but also very meaningful. This is all, of course, thanks to the inspiration that the developers of Scorn were drawing from a couple of very influential artists. The visual style of Scorn is obviously inspired by the works of H.R. Geiger, the artist that famously came up with the design for the xenomorph and the biomechanical visual style that is present in much of the architecture and marketing material in the Alien movies. But inspiration was also heavily drawn from Polish painter Zdzisław Beksinski. Once you look at some of his art, the resemblance becomes clear. Both Geiger and Beksinski envisioned these unfathomable locations with nightmarishly abstract creatures, scenes that make you feel tiny, like the entire universe is suddenly staring back at you. And that's exactly what Scorn feels like. You are this insignificant leftover insect in this massive world that seems to have moved on while you're still trying to find your place in it. Which brings us to questions like what, where, how, when. This is when Scorn starts to get kinda hard to digest. When it comes to the story, Scorn refuses to explain itself. There are no NPCs, no text logs, no exposition dumps, no radio chatter, no collectible diary pages. The game simply drops you into this chaos and expects you to figure everything out by yourself. Whether that's brilliant or incredibly frustrating depends entirely on what kind of player you are. If you want my opinion, I actually really enjoyed the narrative of Scorn, the deep meaning of the protagonist's journey, and how even the developers left a lot of things up in the air just so people could have some room to come up with their own theories and interpretations of things. Unfortunately, if you are not willing to do some homework and put on your game theory hat, the game's story is going to fly completely over your head. You'll find many reviews of people saying that Scorn was a waste of their time, they didn't get what it was all about, and that the ending was stupid. And this is completely understandable, and it's a matter of misplaced expectations and bad labeling. It's very easy to be misled by Scorn. It looks like a horror game, but isn't scary in the way that you would expect. Although it features combat and guns, it's also not an FPS. Even when people describe it as a puzzle game, I think that's still going to create the wrong expectations. Scorn is an atmospheric exploration game, with some puzzle elements and some combat encounters, but the core experience of the game is all about exploring these derelict locations where the biggest puzzle is figuring out what happened to this strange world and what is the purpose of your character in the middle of all of this. If you don't go in ready to absorb all the little details and speculate about everything the game shows you, you won't be engaging with the best parts of the game, and you're just going to be struggling with the puzzles and combat. And it's not a good kind of struggle. Full disclaimer, I am not the smartest guy on the planet, and I don't play puzzle games very often, so obviously I have several minutes of footage of me just spamming buttons, hoping the puzzles will solve themselves while my brain is completely blank. But seriously, I think many of the puzzles in Scorn are just unnecessarily hard, or take too long to solve once you already know the solution, which is objectively bad puzzle design. Also, for a game that prides itself on its extremely outlandish and abstract concepts, the puzzles you find throughout the game are pretty familiar. If it wasn't for the insane visuals, most of these puzzles would be completely unimpressive. They are basically very gross reskins of puzzles and challenges that you've already seen in a ton of different games before. However, I can still say that I did enjoy some of the puzzles, and the ones that involved shocking amounts of gore were definitely a highlight for me. But anyway, if only Scorn was a completely puzzle-driven game, maybe a lot more people could have given a lot better scores. Unfortunately, for some reason, the developers decided that what Scorn really needed was some good old-fashioned first-person combat. Early on in the game, after completing some puzzles and exploring some new locations, you're going to come across this funky-looking weapon. Even though it looks like a sort of ranged weapon, this is actually a melee weapon that shoots off this piston thing that reminds me of a xenomorph's tongue. Soon you'll be required to fight some enemies with this thing, and sweet mother, this thing sucks. It has a very short range, a really awkward cooldown period, and it doesn't do a lot of damage to enemies, resulting in these unnecessarily drawn out and clunky combat encounters where you have to constantly run around these man chickens and the chicken mans. Also, when you finally get the killing blow, sometimes it triggers a kill animation, which is, yet again, unnecessarily long, and it locks your character down for several seconds, giving nearby enemies a chance to close the distance. It's completely stupid. I'll try not to spoil too much of the game right now, but later on you do unlock a couple of ranged weapons that are way more effective. But then, ammo is very limited, and aiming requires you to sit still if you don't want to completely lose your accuracy. The developers were really trying to go for that survival horror style of difficult combat that makes you feel vulnerable, but it just comes across as slow and awkward. And it gets in the way of far more interesting things, especially towards the end of the game. In order to ramp up the tension and create a sense of climax, Scorn starts throwing a bunch of enemies at you, which is a really bad idea considering the combat mechanics kinda suck. It's completely understandable that some people end up giving up on the game at this point, especially if they are not interested in story or exploration, which are the two strongest elements of Scorn. But regardless of all these flaws, Scorn still has one of the most unique stories I have ever experienced in a video game. It takes some effort to understand, and every player is going to interpret something differently, but if you can look past the clunky combat and the tiring puzzles, there is a great game at the core of Scorn. Now, if you don't mind spoilers, I'm going to go over what happens in the game, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the underlying plot and meaning of Scorn. As you continue exploring this dark and quiet factory building, you come across a chamber where you have to assist some flying robots to power this contraption in the middle of the room. This is slowly causing the giant blinds in front of the building to open, so maybe you're trying to escape or let something in, but at this point, it's hard to tell. However, before the machine can be fully powered, it malfunctions, and your character is apparently killed in the explosion. This is when you realize the cutscene at the start of the game was actually showing you the very first and the very last moments of this character. Your next character is a newborn. In the world of Scorn, it seems like humans sprout from this massive wall of flesh. They emerge fully grown, and their first experience is aimlessly wandering this wasteland. Eventually, your character finds a way into the same facility where the last character was before. Your new character continues to attempt to operate abandoned machinery in order to open doors and make his way somewhere. But suddenly, it seems like a dangerous creature is stalking you. You avoid it for as long as possible, but it eventually catches up to you. The creature suddenly emerges from the dark and lunges at you, wrapping itself around you and plunging its strangely human hands into your body. It seems like this is the end once again, but you survive. This monster turns out to be a parasite that latches onto your back and lends you an extra pair of hands. You can look down at any point in the game and see the parasite's limbs buried into your abdomen. One of the parasite's hands also holds this bundle of flesh that basically acts as a diegetic inventory where you can see how much ammo and healing items you have. For the majority of the game, you're going to have this creature attached to your back, but not without a cost. Every once in a while, the parasite decides to bury a little bit deeper into your body, causing extreme pain and mutilation. This gets worse and worse as the game goes on until one of the player's main objectives becomes very obvious. You have to remove the parasite as soon as possible. The first act of the game is set entirely in this place that looks like a factory. This is in fact a place of industry where things and living beings are constructed and recycled. This is where your first character dies, and it's where the new protagonist goes to find passage to the next area of the game. You find a series of elevators that take you down to another facility that's located somewhere at the bottom of this massive hole that can be seen earlier when you were exploring the wasteland. This place seems to have been overrun by some sort of plague or invasive organism. Yet again, something that seems to be an amalgamation of organs, muscles, and flesh. Except this time, some of these organisms are actually alive. These flying monsters and crawling horrors seem to be the offspring of this much larger creature that exists at the bottom of the crater. Why this creature is here and why does it spawn all these monsters is unclear. The crater is a dark and demoralizing challenge that you'll be happy to leave behind. Eventually you'll find a tram that you can ride away from the madness of the crater and the factory. You can't see much of the outside world during the ride since everything is covered in a thick layer of dust and fog, but the place you arrive at is a sight to behold. The final area of the game looks like a mix between a royal palace and the holy city. The entire place is covered in carvings, murals, and statues depicting sexual acts, alluding to reproduction, human evolution, and other such themes. Once you enter the main building, you see a large number of human bodies installed on these devices, with their heads cracked open and their brain matter woven together into an immense web that stretches across the ceiling and into the sky. In this building, the character seems to be trying to power up these humanoid bodies that are lying down with a red substance in their bellies, making them look like pregnant women. But there's something else that needs to be dealt with very soon. The parasite keeps staring at your insides more and more, and you're starting to become severely incapacitated by this. Thankfully, after dealing with a couple more puzzles, you find a surgical device that allows you to operate on yourself and remove the parasite once and for all. In this moment, you come to a shocking realization. While using the surgical machine, you can take a better look at what the creature on your back looks like, and it looks like it has a face. The face of the character you see in the game's menu. The same character you play as in the beginning of the game. The character that was presumed dead, but instead seems to have mutated into this being that we've been calling the parasite. Turns out the original protagonist of the game is also the main antagonist. Unfortunately, the process of ripping out the parasite leaves your body extremely damaged, and the parasite itself manages to shake itself free from the machine and escape. But there's no time to waste. You finally manage to activate the pregnant shells, and after that, you offer yourself to a surgical robot that awaits in the center of the temple. The surgeon restrains the protagonist and begins carving into him and connecting various tubes into his body. Then the head is sawed open and the character's brain is connected to the brain web. This is when something absolutely incredible happens. It seems like our character's consciousness is not just transferred to one of the reactivated vessels, but the protagonist can actually switch from one vessel to the other. This allows you to complete one final puzzle where one vessel holds a large door open while another vessel carries the character's original damaged body through the doorway. At the end of a long hallway, there's a strange rift that appears to be a passage to a different realm, somewhere more peaceful. While controlling the vessel, our character is carrying himself away from the chaos of this world. Perhaps this is what happened to everybody else. This civilization exhausted the capabilities of the human body and even reached the limits of what they could do with technology, and as a result, the only remaining solution to escape a stagnant world was to transcend the physical realm. Maybe this was the goal all along. But as you walk towards the great unknown, your ascendance is interrupted. The surviving parasite emerges from behind a statue. It slithers in your direction, shoves the pregnant vessel aside, and reattaches itself to you. The The protagonist reaches for the vessel, but it's too late. The parasite takes over completely, and your character is finally consumed, only a few steps away from salvation. Scorn is a game about the cycle of life and death. It's about the challenges of the physical world and humanity's attempts to reach a higher state of being in order to escape a meaningless existence. But naturally, if you're not the type of player that tries to squeeze every drop of lore and meaning from every pixel, the story of Scorn might go completely over your head, and what remains is a visually stunning but slow and clunky game. And this is why the game was received so poorly after multiple long years of waiting, hype, and speculation. Number one, people expected a kind of survival horror game, but what they got was more of a walking simulator. Number two, the game's generic puzzles and awkward combat filtered out a lot of players right from the get-go. Number three, Scorn is much more interested in provoking thought than creating satisfying gameplay. It's a type of game that doesn't really have a big audience. Another thing that people will mention about Scorn is its short runtime of about 4 to 6 hours, but I wouldn't count this as a negative because I feel like if the game was any longer, it would become kinda boring. Scorn does exactly what it sets out to do, using only the necessary amount of time. And if you buy it for like under €4, you can't really complain. Now, does all of this make Scorn a bad game? Well, in my opinion, no, it really doesn't. Honestly, I give this game a 7 out of 10. If the combat and the puzzles were a bit better, you could be looking at a masterpiece, but even with its gameplay flaws, you have the mind-blowing story, the memorable narrative style, and of course, the insane visuals. I can only describe Scorn as a unique experience that you're going to be thinking about long after you finish it. Recently, there's been a lot of talk about games that are made for everybody, and how that usually results in soulless, pointless games. Well, Scorn is exactly the opposite of that. It wasn't made for everybody, but the people who made it had a very strong and very specific vision in mind. You can look at the pre-alpha footage that was released in 2014 and see that even after 7 years in development hell, the final product still looks very similar to what was originally pitched. Ebb Software was determined to deliver this unique vision, and they delivered it very well. If you enjoy a good story and deep lore, you should give it a try regardless of what people say or don't say about it. And that's the end of Scorn, a short but memorable horror experience that was unfairly forgotten. If you enjoyed this review, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, let me know if you enjoy more gameplay focused and technical reviews, or if you like to see some deep dives into the stories and lore of some of these games. Don't forget to leave a comment. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye bye.